Thank you. I mean, this has been a really wonderful invitation. It's been great to come to Sudbury. Every time I get a chance to travel, my friends always send me things. So I had a whole list of things about answers that are supposed to be stated in questions, which I'm sure is pretty tiring for you folks with Alice Trebek. But the reason I'm here is to talk about, it's really something of a modest investment that we made in economics, in our community, but one that led to transformational results for our citizens. So tonight, what I want to talk about is three distinct areas of our development. And the first is First Nation governance. I want to talk in the middle of First Nation economic development and conclude with some lessons. And with this, I want to also weave in a few case studies, because the reality of it is, a lot of our thinking and our thoughts and how we've come to solutions were really borrowed and begged and stolen from many other people, and hopefully a couple ideas will come tonight. And so it's really just our implementation and creativity of putting together a lot of other ideas that we heard. And this is kind of the way we've done it in a very rural area. These are some pictures from our community. Often we get around bonfires, there's lots of northern lights. We've seen them too often, I don't even get off the couch anymore. And the other one is a Skookum Jim's house, which I'll talk a little bit later tonight. This is Carcross. As David mentioned, we're in southern Yukon, and our traditional territory overlaps into BC. So we have self-governing agreements in the Yukon and unceded Aboriginal rights and title in BC. And this is our chief in our community in front of our Skookum Jim's house. We have a very long history of trail and trade. In 1870, one of the first historical records of non-native interaction with our community was two traders. They were boating towards Dawson on the Yukon River. And they were reading about these fierce Tlingit warriors who were cannibalistic and would crush people under their poles. And they're really nervous about this. And as they turned the corner from Lake Bennett, and they were coming into the narrow strait, they saw a bunch of Tlingits on the banks, yelling at them, "Hey, hey!" And they're getting really worried. So our membership got in the war canoes and started coming up to them, and they surrounded their two boats. And so just when the individual's name was Stacy and Jurgensen was reaching down to get his gun out, and just before he pulled it out, one of our members lifted up a bunch of fish and said, "You got some tobacco?" What these guys didn't know was 200 years earlier, we were trading off the coast of Alaska with Russians. And so we have a very long history of trail and trade, a very long history of entrepreneurship. The gentleman there to your left is a great uncle of mine, is Skookum Jim. It's his nephew, Dawson Charlie. Kate Carmack's their sister, and she married a man named George Washington Carmack's. And what happened in 1898, Skookum Jim, Dawson Charlie, and Kate Carmack's and George Washington Carmack's, they struck gold. They, in essence, started the Klondike Gold Rush in 1898. And the picture at the very bottom is all of the largely Americans that were coming over the pass to find their own piece of wealth in the Klondike. And Skookum Jim packed over the trail one individual stuff, and I told the story at lunch, but it's a new audience. His name was Fred, and he ultimately opened up at the end of the Chilkoot Trail this establishment called the Arctic. And downstairs he had horse meat, and upstairs was a Klondike, so it was a brothel. And so we actually built a bit of a replica of it, and we're trying to get his great-grandson to come pay homage to his legacy. And Fred's last name was Trump. And so actually the Donald Trump's legacy and fortune started in Carcross, of all places. Then in 1805, he moved back to New York. So this is just a timeline of our very long history of trail and trade, a very long history of entrepreneurship, a very long history of being self-sufficient. But of course, residential school came. This school actually was in Carcross. I won't go into the long history of it, but it was an incredible, grave implication for our community and our culture, of course, Aboriginals in the country. And for us in particular, on the economic development side, on the self-sufficiency side, it really killed it. The idea of self-sufficiency was a very difficult one, and we ultimately fell into a long cycle of dependency. However, in 1973, all our chiefs, these are all the chiefs from the 14 First Nations, they went to Ottawa and they put towards Prime Minister Trudeau at the time, Pierre Trudeau, a document called Together Today for Our Children Tomorrow. And what it was a treaty, a mandate for us to become self-governing. It was, in essence, a document that we needed to return to our traditional ways and be able to govern for ourselves. And in particular, it was all of the First Nations in the Yukon coming together realizing we have to stand together because we need to be able to be self-sufficient, and it's the only way we're going to remove ourselves from the vestiges of the Indian Act. In 2005, we ratified our self-government agreement, and that's when I actually went back to the community. Prior to that, I was in BC negotiating treaties with BC First Nations, and then in 2005, I went back home to help implement the self-government agreements. In 2008, I wrote an article for the Globe and Mail. I think in many respects, self-government isn't really well known. There's only around 22 or 23 self-governing First Nations in the country, and 11 of them are in the Yukon. So I wrote to the national paper to try and get some recognition and some understanding around self-government, and I'll just briefly read what I wrote. This may surprise Canadians, but the Carcas-Tagish First Nation is a legitimate level of government. There is a unique experiment going on in Canada. We have empowered 11 Yukon First Nation groups to establish their own governments through self-government agreements that facilitate many of the same powers as a territory. These powers are entrenched in constitutionally protected deals that elevate Canada to a world leader in recognizing the rights of Indigenous people. These accomplishments, however, are largely unknown to Canadians. My own First Nation is no longer an Indian Act band governed by the Federal Indian Act. We have negotiated to become a legitimate level of government in Canada. The country's constitutional recognition of Indigenous governments stand as testimony to a tolerant society that celebrates diversity and rewards those who strive for a better life. I returned home 3 years ago to lead the ratification of the Carcas-Tagish First Nation final and self-government agreements. The question I now ask myself, can we move beyond historical dysfunctional relationship with the Government of Canada? Our agreements give us the tools to achieve self-reliance, exercise self-determination in accordance with our cultural principles and values, and become active members within the constitutional framework of Canada. Our vision is to ensure that our citizens are healthy, self-reliant, and educated. As one example, the University of Victoria and the Justice Institute of British Columbia run full certificate programs in our rural community. Our first cohort, which included a number of grandmothers, graduated last month. Members are improving their lives. For example, a friend who spent her life in the prison system recently completed her parole period and showed me her certificate in traditional parenting she earned while in anticipation of her first grandchild being born. Last summer, she showed me at the age of 60 her first paycheck she had ever received. She wanted to return to jail to proudly show the check to her other family. I wanted to give her an equivalent amount so she could frame her accomplishment. These are the days that illustrate and validate my hope and belief we are indeed progressing. Our First Nation will be the first Indigenous government in the world to implement our own legislation based on our traditional virtues and values. It was legislation, the Indian Act, that stripped Canada's First Nations of their culture. We believe it is also legislation, in part, that will reestablish our traditional practices in a modern context. The Family Act, our first piece of legislation, recognized the importance of the family, the child within our First Nation. Its objective is to ensure that our children, who are overrepresented in the Yukon child welfare system, are provided with the proper services that keep them safe, healthy, connected to their clans, community, and of course, family. Raising our children in a culturally appropriate and safe environment will ensure that we have a generation of new leaders who understand our teachings and our traditions. Our government is trying to move beyond enabling our citizens to cling to a cultural dependency fostered through the Indian Act. With this in mind, our new social assistance program is temporary. Once a job is offered or a healing plan established, the clock starts ticking towards the time when social assistance will discontinue for those who feel unearned money is a right. Our people are responding positively to the efforts to encourage self-sufficiency. We now tax our citizens to build own source revenues. Traditionally, our potlatch system would redistribute wealth among our people. We view taxing as a modern way to share the community's wealth. Our government is based on a solid foundation of good governance, reflective of our traditional ways. A clan-based system governance structure which ensures no one person could easily succumb to corruption. Decision-making powers are distributed across 6 clans who represent families and all their voice of all their members, provide check and balance as well as equal opportunity. In partnership with Canada, we've rejected the Indian Act and welcomed responsibility to govern ourselves. But it remains much pain in the community. We have still citizens who wake up to blue skies and spend the day looking for a cloud. Ultimately, we have negotiated for the opportunity to flourish, to see our people live a life sought by the Canadians, to be safe, healthy, proud of their nation. The tools, the timing, the opportunity is there. The choice is ours. So that's 10 years ago now. One of the things that we did with self-government is, and this is actually a lot of discussion today, was realizing we need to have outcomes. And to self-govern, of course, is very important, but it has to be improving the lives of our citizens. So one of the markers that we had, and we did some longitudinal studies, and we started to realize that our children in the grade school system, they generally were reading and writing 2 years below what other children were. And so we ended up going to a place called Boston, a place called Roca, and it's one of the case studies I'd like to present very briefly, and saying we need to have transformational relationships with our young people, and we need to get them to another level. And one of the things that Roca did was they looked at the stages of change, and they put this kind of sophisticated model down to say, how do you actually go through the stages of change, and when can you recognize in young people that they're ready for actual action? And when they are ready for action, that you're there with mentorship and the appropriate level of support, that they actually can make change that sticks. We're trying to make it stick. And so we went with the Roca system to, in essence, change our young people's life circumstance. Roca actually is in this place called Revere outside Boston. They work with a lot of young people who fell into crime, and they interject in these transformational relationships to try and take people to another level outside of crime, and have a phenomenal track record. And we had an exchange back and forth in some ways to traditionally work with dispute resolution. So we had a bit of a partnership. And we were really doing that to bolster our own, not only theory, but our own results in governing ourselves and trying to move ourselves from some of the high-risk behaviors of our youth. So with that, once we've established good governance, which in many ways we have, we said we need to move on. One of the challenges at the time is we were invested in companies that are outside our own community. And our people were saying, it's really wonderful that we're shareholders to a company that we don't see. We're shareholders to a company that doesn't provide us dividend. We want to see greater value. And we said, well, we're not going to provide dividends back to people because we don't think cutting a check pulls people out of poverty. And so we'll invest in our community so that the direct benefit will be actual jobs very close to your front door. But as we started to divest in the town and come to our very rural area, we found there were some really significant economic challenges. And I'm just going to highlight a few in a video, if you don't mind pressing play.
Welcome back. 1 year into self-government, the Carcross and Tagish First Nations are looking at ways to tap into the tourism industry by showcasing their culture for thousands of tourists who visit each year.
Carcross, a small rustic town, is home to the Tagish and inland Tlingit people of the Southern Lakes region of the Yukon. It's also the home base for the Carcross Tagish First Nation. Remnants from a long ago era give Carcross its character and charm. "2007 marks the return of the White Pass and Yukon Route train into Carcross. This is the first time in 25 years the train has brought tourists into the community. With the train and the tour buses, Carcross is a busy hub during the tourist season.
You can see downtown today, there's a number of buses, and the tourists are obviously going around, purchasing things, looking around, getting an idea of downtown Carcross. Most of these people are actually visitors as opposed to guests. So not staying very long. The buses will be here about 20 minutes. And so the tourists themselves, generally as they get off the train or off the bus, are just here to stretch their legs and maybe buy an ice cream and probably take some pictures.
Justin Ferbey's job is to help stimulate the economy for the First Nation.
As many people as here, the opportunity is not as great as one assumes. Although there is opportunities, but the market that we look at probably is somewhat different than retired tourists who are on a package tour.
Carcross has always been a crossroads. The First Nation people would make their winter camps here on the shores of Nares River to fish and hunt caribou. During the 1898 Klondike Gold Rush, thousands of miners traveled through the waterways, and at the turn of the 20th century, White Pass and Yukon route drove the last spike, linking the interior to the coast. Carcross has been and still is the gateway for tourists who come to learn about the Klondike. However, Justin Ferbey and the Carcross-Tagish First Nation see Carcross as a destination that offers more than just a place to grab ice cream.
The idea of the gold rush history is starting to wane. People are actually becoming more interested in solitary experiences, experiences on the land. They want to get away from their hectic lives and come somewhere that's relaxing. So I think one of the appealing things is, look around, there's absolutely beautiful outdoor experiences here. There's opportunities to hike and bike, get on the water system. And I think that's what people want.
First Nation and its economic development arm helped citizens start up small businesses for the 2007 tourist season.
We wanted to have like First Nation content. We wanted to have our presence being known and seen. So we decided to start a company that would allow us to showcase our dances and our songs and to tell some of our legends.
First Peoples Performances showcases the Tlingit legend of how Raven brought light to the world.
Until the chief's beautiful daughter. Ooh.
Well, I saw the hugest raven I've ever seen. Of course I had to follow him.
This was our first year here at Cool Scene, which is a building right here on the water. We built a theater here. The summer was slow. We didn't get very many tourists actually coming. And so what we thought, like, we'd come here, rain or shine, didn't matter if there was one person or 10 people or no people in the audience, we would still do our show and we would sing our songs. And so, you know, as far as we're concerned, we had a very successful summer.
At the beginning of the season, it was hoped the daily White Pass train would provide a lot of opportunities for the local entrepreneurs. But that wasn't the case.
This past season, Cool Scene here, we in fact did start providing different kind of opportunities. This segment of tourists that did come, we're not that interested in it. And it needs to grow a bit, it needs more marketing.
The awesome beauty of the land of the Carcross-Tagish First Nation in itself is a gold mine. Plans for a resort-like destination in the area will be presented to the community in the near future.
So one of the lessons has been to provide the kind of market that will attract people here as a destination, will attract guests who want to stay here, who want to experience the local environment, the local culture, in particular First Nation aspects. We need to develop the kind of products that will attract tourists. We need to market our story. And if we don't do that, you can't necessarily hitch our opportunities to someone else's train.
So one of the first things we did is we got everyone together and we said we need a prosperity mandate. We need to obviously look at the risk we have in the community, we need to invest in the community, and we need a solution that potentially could bring the kind of benefit that we hope for, and most importantly, provide diversity of opportunities, diversity of jobs, particularly for our young people. So we created the management corporation with the vision to grow a private sector in economy in Carcross, not just for ourselves, but for the region, and of course for the Yukon, given our area of southern Yukon. And with that, with our self-government agreements, we did get access to low-cost capital, roughly around $40 million. And so we established two trust funds. One was roughly $30 million, and we invested that in the money markets, global money markets. And the other one we invested in active direct investment, in essence a venture capital fund that we'd actively invest in Carcross. And then we made a strategy. We said we do want to stay on the tourism sector. We do have tourists that come through, but they're all involved in a vertical integrated marketing system, meaning they're owned by somebody else. They're owned by the cruise lines, they're owned by the buses. We have to have some of our own guests that are coming to Carcross for a destination. And so we established the step number one, which is to grow a niche market. And we said, we're going to start focusing on mountain bike trails. Step number two, we said if we have these people coming to our community as guests, we need to service the market. Step number three, we need to have overnight the market and accommodations. And step number four, we need to house the market. In essence, try and get over the seasonality challenge of having a tourism sector. We also had some cross-starting strategies. We wanted to have a triple three economic strategy, people, plan, and profit. We wanted to balance that. We also wanted to address the poverty through training and entrepreneurship. And we also wanted to have distributive justice, meaning it was fair to everyone, equally fair to everyone, not more fair to some sectors, but everyone would have the same chance, the same opportunities. And of course, ultimately, we wanted to understand the cost of no. We had a long history in Carcross of economic chances, but we didn't really weigh the opportunity cost of no. And so over the years, we had chances to invest in areas we said didn't go for it, but then invariably, a few weeks or months or a year later, we said, where's all the jobs? Well, it was always tied to the no that we said a couple of years earlier. So we said, we've got to get over this, saying no to everything. So these are some of the governing documents that we started with, and I heard Don talking about they started with some of the cultural virtues and values when they started the developments. We did something very similar with the Code of Conduct for tourism. Part of that too is when partners came in, we also had the foundational documents to show people. We also created this prospectus, and of course the visioning documents was our articulation back to the community what our economic strategy was. Here's a development map. This is the four mountains, Nares, Caribou, Grey Mountain, and of course Montana Mountain where the trails are. And you can just see some indications where some of the developments I'll talk about are located. It's a very mountainous area with lots of rivers and lakes. This is the headwaters of the Yukon River, and we're roughly 150 kilometers east of the coast of Alaska. So the actual program, we call it Single Track to Success. And here's where some of the foundational documents, again, we started with an infrastructure plan and a management plan, and of course, community info. One of the reasons I wanted to show these documents, just in case for every reason people have interest, I'm really happy to share later on if people want to email me. We started with our elders. We sat down, we got the elders together, and as I mentioned, talked about how to revitalize our community. Trail and trade seemed to be the avenue. We put our kids to work. It was very hard. They'd get down off the mountain. They were tired and whiny, and they had to go back up the next day. And we said, wonderful. Sometimes they get the rest. This is after work. Play, of course. And these are just some of the enduring images over the last 10 years. So the question was, one of the things is we had to get past the seasonality of it. In the summer, we were doing really wonderfully. We're roughly having 1,000 people a day come to the community for 120 days, 120,000 people. And 3,500 people were coming solely for mountain biking. A lot of them were Alaskans, but they also came from all over the world. protect what you love what you know what you're taught. And for us, what this trail system really was not necessarily just to get tourists to come, but it really was to get our youth back into the mountain. And most importantly, we said for our long-term future, for our culture, if our young folks do not have a profound relationship with land, it is potential that they'll become my age and older, and they may not necessarily protect the land as we do, as our generation does. So that was really what this program was about, was getting our people back into our culture, getting it back to a tradition of welcoming people, getting it back to a tradition of entrepreneurship, and also part of it absolutely was getting young people out of bed and getting them to work and making sure that they could build the kind of character, build the kind of work ethic, and then mashing it with a lot of adults who also said, now that you've achieved these incredible trails, you need to go get your education. And so we're now into our third generation, our third young group. The youngest of these folks now is probably 24, 25, and now we're back down to 14 or 15-year-olds with some of the veterans now who are actually managing the entire project. So here's just a sample of some of the results that we received. When I say we, that these young folks received over the course of 10 years. Thanks. So we achieved the niche market, so now we need to service the niche market. So we sat down and said we wanted to build a retail village, but we wanted to do it in the image of our culture, which we had a long tradition of Tlingit longhouse. We also have 6 clans, the Ishkatan, the Kokotan, the Yen Yeti, the Duklawati, I'm a Gunax Teddy Man, and the Ishkatan. And what we did is we took all the buildings and one of our clan symbols on each of the spaces. And we also started getting into returning to our tradition of totem pole carving. And this is what we started off with just a graphic and a thought, and this was kind of the early indication of what the community wanted to build. With this, I just want to give one other case study. One of the challenges is investing in the north. It's a perverse investment environment, financially perverse. What I mean by that is you always look at investment profiles and you say, you want a risk-reward paradigm. So if it's highly risky, you suspect to get high rewards back. If you invest in penny stock, if it does well, you can get really well rewarded. It's a good chance you'll lose all your money. And so the challenge, though, in the north is it's quite risky in the sense you have to put a lot of capital into the building, but you don't get a lot of money back because the economy is quite immature. And so one of the models, and Canor, back in the Yukon, we really tried to get them to look this way, is saying there is strong business case for a top-down investment. This is probably one of the greater examples of a top-down investment. This is Summerside, this is in PEI, and it actually built the retail facility there. And once that facility was established, it was able to stand on its own 2 feet and attract entrepreneurs to come, create a cash flow, but it really came from federal government seed capital. And with that, over the years, all the federal and public largesse is gone, private sector takes over, and it really can be an economic driving force. So there is a good case at times for a top-down investment. This was the start of our Carcross Commons. We started the construction in the winter, which people thought was really crazy. In some ways it is, because the Yukon has long winters and it's 40 below. But the other reason we did that, and we knew it would cost a little more, it's also the time when there's the highest unemployment, particularly around men and women. So we said, let's build this thing in the winter, largely because then we can get the dollars flowing during the very time there's the least unemployment. This is a replica of Skookum Jim's house. This was the opening 3 years ago now. That's the chief and I. The entrepreneurs, interestingly enough, started with the elders, the elder entrepreneurs, not the young. It was actually really the older people who were the first ones to step up to do business. This is Caribou Coffee. We convinced the Yukon government to come in as a anchor tenant. This is the new Visitor Information Center. So another ways we mitigated risk is through the partnership. We're getting the government to take in and provide year-round rates at a government rate, even though they really only use the building for 5 months. Just some examples of the celebration over the years in the Carcross Commons. We also created a carving studio, and that's Keith Wolf's. You've probably all been through Vancouver. You probably all saw the art. There's generally 2 pieces of artwork you're going to see there. You're going to see Bill Reed. He has the large, beautiful boat that's in the international section. That's actually, of course, a replica from the original piece, which is in Washington at the Canadian Embassy. And Keith Wolf's mentor is Dempsey Bob. All the other artwork when you get into the international section, that's Dempsey Bob's work. And so one of the things that we did also is we said we need to incent little micro retail spaces. So I sat in my basement one night and I made these little crappy sheds out of cardboard and little pieces of paper. And I went back to the community and said, we got to build this. And so as I mentioned before, it's quite expensive to build in the north. So one of the challenges, even though it's a 5-season building, you have to be up the building code. And that makes it very expensive because you have to do R50 walls and R60 roof and all the foundation and the bathrooms. By the time you're done, you're looking at $200, $250 a square foot. So I said, let's just skip all that and let's build these little mini trailers. And so we got together, a bunch of guys, and we bought some trailers. We had them shipped in from Edmonton. And we started putting together these in essence, small pop-up retail spaces. This is the crew, and they're halfway through. It provided around 10,000 hours of labor during the winter. So again, we wanted to do this over winter to get people working. And this is just some images of the small trailers. So when they're actually done, they were fully subscribed to. There's in fact more people, but they actually don't look like trailers when they're done because we backed them up to our big deck. You can't really see the wheels. And so they really turned out really beautifully. And people were really excited because it's such a small space. It was all birch inside, very beautiful. And the rent was virtually nothing. It's $150 a month is all we charged. And in addition to that, one of the things that we did is, as a development corporation, we provided the marketing for the entire commons. Because we realized someone who's paying you $150 a month doesn't have a lot of marketing budget. So on top of that, we did a bunch of marketing to get people going. And here's some of the pictures of the final product. And then, of course, this is some of the examples of some of the marketing that we put in a number of magazines over the years. The cultural revitalization. So one of the things we said, it's really commendable to make a profit, but we said we need to be better than that. We need a higher bar than that. Commendable, make a profit, but be exceptional if we can make a profit, at the same time revitalize elements of our culture.
Hey, hey, ha, 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 ha. Hey, hey, ha, ha, ha. Hey, hey, ha, ha, ha. Hey, hey, ha, ha, ha.
There's many types of poles. You can have history pole, clan poles, debt poles, mortuary poles, potlatch poles, interior house poles, memorial poles. This totem pole is a story pole. It's for a centerpiece for our Carcross Commons project. It's western red cedar, and it comes from northern British Columbia in terrace. We start off with chainsaws and big chisels and gouges, and we do all the rough work. But in the end, the final finish is all hand carved. Your tools have to be really extremely sharp for cedar. Cedar is straight grained and fibrous, that the knife has to be completely sharp to cut it. If it doesn't cut it, it'll tear it. The main figure is at the bottom is a coastal Tlingit man, representing the trading relationship we had with coastal Tlinkits. Us being inland Tlingit or Tagish, this trading arrangement actually intermarried our two cultures. And that's where the art came from. The art came from the coast with the coastal Tlingit. So the second figure represents a Tagish woman receiving a box of trade goods. That represents the intermarriage between our two cultures. As we get past the woman further up the pole, we have a story And one of our stories about Skookum Jim, he rescued a frog on the way to the goldfields. We believe that the frog actually returned the favor to Skookum Jim and helped Skookum Jim find the gold. And then the killer whale represents Skookum Jim is actually coming back down the pole to help the frog. Sitting on the killer whale's tail is a thunderbird. Right after the gold rush, White Pass train came. And if you look on the White Pass train today, the symbol is a thunderbird. So we put the thunderbird there to represent the coming of White Pass. It's a big part of our life now, and it has been for over 100 years. Finally, at the top of the totem pole, we're putting a copper shield. In our language, we call it tina. In the past, it represented prosperity and wealth. Not monetary wealth. We want spiritual wealth as well, and balance.
Yeah, that's gonna bring that in a little bit more. Just grew up around the shop with my old man. Watched a lot of carving, so the art came natural to me. It's the biggest project that I've done so far, and especially, I guess, to be able to do it with my father. It's a good project. Couldn't ask for anything else. Got it good here.
I'm enjoying working with my son. It's honorable, and I'm proud of him. And to be able to sit and talk and have dinner at night and talk about the day's work, and then come in the morning and plan what we're going to do. And a lot of times we don't really agree on everything, you know, which is really cool because can't always have it my way, you know. So, and it works. It works better when two people are playing off each other. And in the end, what happens is it's the art that flourishes. It'll be painted. Tlingit culture is really colorful and bright and vibrant, and that's what I like. I like to show lots of color. Red represents life. Black represents protection. Blue represents wealth, or it was used like decorative. And white was peace. There's rules about where the colors go too. Really strict rules with Tlingit art, and you have to master this design. You know, it took me 10 years before I understood what I was really doing. So it takes a long time to, you have to master the design. Then the next challenge is to develop your own style. See, our culture, Tlingit culture, is so visible and because of the art. It's colorful, you know, it's vibrant. I always say that my art is dead without the people. It's the people that bring my art to life. I can do a piece and it can sit here all day long, but the minute somebody dons it and dances with it, it brings the piece to life. For me, that makes it real, and it's a living culture then.
Hey, hey, yo, ho, ho, ho. Hey, hey, yo, ho, ho. Hey, yo, hey. Hey, yo, ho. Hey, yo, hey. Hey, yo, ho. Hey, hey, yo, ho, ho. Hey, hey, yo, ho, ho. Whee. Hoo-ha! Hoo-ha! Keep going. Watch it, watch it, watch it, slow down. Oh. Woo! That was awesome.
So on that day, it was called Hakasti. That's our way. It was a festival. This tourist was standing beside me, and they just by chance were there, we're raising our pole. And she was just so amazed, like, what is this? You know, it's just incredible. I said, it's just Sunday, you should see Monday. We moved on to our third step, which is accommodating the market. This was this idea of a 5-star resort. Here's some of the planning documents that we put towards to the community. at a place called Mill Haven, just outside Carcross, 16 kilometers down the lake system. It was a fly-in resort. It was in partnership. The early work was at John Caton. I heard someone mention Fogo Island, of course, in Newfoundland with Zena. At any rate, John's in competition with her. And so at John's place, it's the 7th most expensive place in the world to stay at. You stay in a wall tent, a prospector's wall tent, for about $3,500 a night. We all went there. We thought it was nuts because, of course, for us, we'll stay in a wall tent for a trading of a fish. But we've been working with John for a few years now to see if he can extend his brand into our backyard. Last one was growing the market on the residential development. We realized that we need to have a year-round economy, and so we started looking at one of our prized pieces of land called Lake Bennett Beach. And it's kind of an interesting piece of land because, as I mentioned earlier today, it's been named top 10 in a bunch of different places. The Reader's Digest named it a top 10 beach, but also National Geographic named it a top 10 beach, which seems really nuts because it's not the first thing you think about is the north and a beach. But what happened was National Geographic only has a couple of photographers that are on full-time staff. And Paul Nicklin, he's done some really famous stuff in the Arctic. He lived 10 kilometers from Carcross at the time, so the fix was in. Again, we want to go back to our Tlingit culture. This is one of the buildings, the community house that we're actually building right now. And one of the things that we did when we struggled in saying, how can we build this in a way that looks unique, but also is going to have a lot of cachet, and ultimately something that's quite different. And so we did something kind of innovative. We started looking through Dwell magazine, and we said, let's get all the architects in Dwell magazine, and let's do this little contest. And so what we did is we wrote them all, and we said, we'll give you $2,500 each for you to give us a concept. And from the concept, we're going to hold a little contest in Whitehorse, and we're going to pick a winner. And so here's 3 examples that we got from the actual architects. All the architects that responded were in Toronto. This was the first one. This is a lady in Toronto that tried to reflect the longhouse in a traditional modern way. Another group was a little more probably modern, if you will. And the last one was really went more for, it's more wood, more of a pole. And so we had just people put your general stickers on, red, blue, and green, and we tried to come to pick the one. The idea here for this development in particular was we need to displace all of government money, we need to get the private sector capital in, and in particular we needed people like yourselves who invest in our community to buy a home. And the only caveat is you get this phenomenal piece of land on the waterfront, but we're going to build it for you. But we needed to get our citizens trained up so they had the tickets, and so that when we turned over the keys, you had a really high quality product. So we started this program called Tiny Homes, and what it was is that we realized one of the challenges was not necessarily the skill set. And in fact, it's really interesting is when you try to get populations back into work, what is something that often fails is just keep training. Because the reality is if the only challenge it was is get some more training, they'd instantly be back in work. But really often is the case, in particular in our community, it was foundational stuff. It was a lot of the residential school, long time abuse, so there's lots of challenge in people employability. There's addiction issues that have masked lots of abusive behaviors. And so we had to sit down and say with our government, we need to, in essence, have this ethos of whatever it takes, we need to get our citizens through school, and we also need to deal with some of the root foundational issues why they can't work. And so we sat down and said, let's run this little program called Tiny Homes. And what we did for the youth, let's do it for an older age group. From the 30 to 40 to 50-year-olds, let's get them back working because we need to have an entire healthy population. Our whole citizens have to get back and help our, in essence, pull on the economic front. So here's the last video, if you don't mind pressing play.
When I first started on February 10th, I was nervous, scared, shy.
Especially when you find yourself, your life in a point where you feel like you're stuck and you're alone,
With the Tiny House project, one of the focuses is to empower our people.
They all stepped up to the plate and they're kind of surprised that we can actually do some of the stuff that they're applied to. So we're breaking down all the phobias that they had.
Whatever support they needed to achieve their goals. We kind of decided we were going to do whatever we needed to do to help people get through the program.
They asked us what was our goal, and each student wrote down their goals on their house. One of my goals was, the big one for me, was learning to read blueprints. That goal was accomplished.
It's about them. It's about doing something for them with their lives, helping them move forward, overcoming whatever it has been that's been in their way.
So we also ended up with 3 really great homes that are well built and sustainable and tailored to a northern environment.
And we have 16 people that are ready to get in the construction field.
It's an opportunity for me and for my fellow workers to get back on track.
It's not going to happen overnight, but I'm getting to where I want to be.
Watching them grow, being responsible, being everything for themselves and their families and their community.
You know, they can learn how to go work in other communities and bring those skills back to their community. So that's very important.
It is emotional for me because I know some of these individual stories. I know where they came from and I know where they're going. And for all of them to be here today, that makes my heart feel good. So thank you guys.
They weren't just there to learn some skills that we had in a book. They were there to help us make the program work for themselves, their families, and for the community as a whole.
I feel real proud about myself. Now I'm apprenticed, and I'm just looking for the next step. Masicho!
So the lakefront property, one of the things that we want to do is we want to build a new tax base. Because we're self-governing, we get to keep 50% of all the personal income tax of the citizens, or anyone, any Canadian that lives on our land. We wanted to increase, of course, the circular flow of the dollar by putting our people back to work. Of course, a year-round activity of people working and realize a new vision and essence, opportunities for our family. Concluding thoughts. One of the big goals for us in this whole thing is, of course, we want to make profit. Of course, we want to put that profit back into the community, but really we want to set our people up for success. We wanted to take people out of a path where there's, at times dysfunction, at times dependency, and really put them in a place where many of you are, aspiring in university to go on to, good careers. That's exactly what we wanted for our people, and this was the strategy we did so. On the partnering side, one of the most important things was for us, not only for the partners to talk about respect, but for us to show really strong partnership skills. And so on all these things, we're able to get new partners to invest in our community. But a lot of it, when the bell rang, when there was a problem, be it regardless what time at night, we picked up the phone, we went and solved it. We always really try to, in essence, match our partners, any of their concerns. So we spent a lot of time realizing, in essence, our customer service and us being service-oriented as Aboriginal partners to non-Aboriginal businesses. Circle squared. One of the things that was interesting, and it's a question for the community, is the Harvard did a study, and the study that they did, in essence, stole our traditional knowledge, and we deserve some commission for this. And what it is when we did the negotiation for the agreements, it took 40 years. And it was really kind of interesting because over the 40-year period of time, you had a couple of First Nations sitting there, and then all the federal departments would come in. Well, one would negotiate tax and fish and land and economic development and heritage, but it was just the same First Nation people sitting there, and all the great lawyers would come in. And in the end, we got a really great agreement. And so the way we did that, though, is when you get groups together and you get group IQ, you can get some phenomenal good ideas, and you can make sure none of the barn doors are open. But there's one interesting thing that Harvard discovered, we tried to keep a secret, and that is if you had a genius, a very smart person, and you had a group, and you had a competition as to who can come up with those creative ideas that make sense, and you started measuring them and saying, wow, this is really smart, and then you try to say, is that the really smart person or is that the group? What do you think? Which which of the results, the individual or the group, in essence had a higher success rate? It was usually the group, but there's one ingredient that could make the group IQ even higher. Does anyone know what that was? No? No? They had another group, they said, let's test this. Let's have a group of really high IQ people versus a group that's not as high IQ. They're absolutely equal. There was no difference when they did in the group context. Then they added one ingredient to the group, and the actual IQ of the group really went up. Does anyone know what that was? Any guess? Here's where our secret was. One of the most important parts, I think in a lot of Indigenous cultures, particularly ours, we in the clan system have a matriarchal system. And so we always talk to our matriarch about our decision making. And the one ingredient in the group that increased group IQ was the addition of women. If there's more women in the group, the actual group IQ goes up. So if women, before they all cheer, if it was all women, it went down to average again. But if you had the balance of men and women, the actual group IQ comes up. And so even though negotiators would come in and just see a few of us sitting at the table, in fact, what was really happening were those people were really the recorders, and they would come back to the community group. And then we'd all get together, the men and women, we'd all think, what do we think about this? And we'd work through all the problems, and we'd come back with a really great solution, a really strong negotiating mandate. And that's what we did in the community also, with all of economic things, to try and get away from any mistakes. In essence, what we were doing is trying to leverage the group IQ to make sure there's no barn doors open. And so, and also, as we kind of joke, this is Rod, who was working at the resort with John, and he was thinking he was going to come in and say, I'm going to see the Aboriginal circle. And he came in and saw it was a square. He was quite disappointed. So it's never predictable, Rod. It's never predictable. Tlingit canoe races. 3 years ago, the Huckasty races, what we did is we had a race with our Tlingit brothers from Teslin. And it's the first time we really used the boat. And we almost beat them, only because we almost crashed at the very front and hit them. And so we were just horrible. So next 3 years, what we did is actually every day at Thursday, we went and trained. And then we had the race last summer. It was really touted how the Tlingit, because we beat them in a tug of war too, how they were going to beat us this next year. And it turns out that weekend, a lot of the big guys who were training all the time, they couldn't come. They turned out to be working. And so they're all lined up, and the Tagish, or the Teslin First Nation, is just so proud, we're going to kill you, Tlingit some Carcross. And we won. We actually beat them. You know how we did it? We added women. And then we had just this great rhythm, and all the big guys, and we had the rhythm, we crushed them, they couldn't believe it. Now they know our secret too. Yes and no. For the work that I did over the years, really the question for me, and is one that really came evident 3 months ago when this new CEO came in. He came up to me a couple days into the job, and he was quite upset because there was this deal he was trying to get on the road, and he went to the ADM, and the answer was no. And he's just like, I can't believe it's no, I don't know how we're gonna get this. And I said to him, I said, congratulations. I'm really proud of you, and I think this is great. He's like, what? I said, the reality is, my good friend, it is always going to be no. And the only question is, how are you going to make that yes? And that's what I want to see, because it's always going to be barriers, there's going to be challenges, there'll be reasons you can't do it. I'm tired, I'm this, I'm that. One consultant said to me the best, and one time he had to come back to me and say, I didn't get the work done, but he said, Justin, I'm going to save you the boring story, and it's going to be done next Friday. And I said, exactly. Save me the boring story, get to yes. That was our history for 10 years. Here's the last video and the last kind of image of what we were trying to do on the trails. This documentary is coming out this summer.
The land has kept us alive for thousands of years. We made a living here one way or the other. But things change. Something always does. It's a matter of how do we want to be a part of it? How do we have a say in the change? Change is going to happen. You can be a part of it, or change it and just run you over.
I love it. I love seeing people coming to my community to ride my trails that I help build with the local youth around town.
We're trying to build a mountain bike destination here in Carcross, but we're doing it in a really community-based, grassroots way, using the youth, getting them back out of the land.
And what ends up happening because of that responsibility is that they start off building trails, but in the end, they build themselves into better people.
So my last comment is one thing after these last, for me, a decade. There's one endearing lesson that was always predictable. And I am going to be as bold to say, as you're trying to figure out solutions in your communities, be it tourism, that this same lesson will also be found by you. It'll be the same situation. In all these little developments, in all these challenges of getting over, and getting over personality issues and politics and money issues, every single time, the persistent lesson is nothing was easy. But the reality of it is, if you have persistence and you have passion, you absolutely will get over those challenges. And one of the things people are saying in the community is, what do you think that solution can be? The reality is if you can leverage the circle and get people in the room for long enough and put their phones down and have real stake in the game, I guarantee you'll come up with the right solutions. It'll take time, you'll get some things that are right and some things are wrong. But programs like this where you bring other speakers, that's exactly how we did it. Is we brought people in from Osoyoos, we brought people in from Vancouver, we brought them in to be change agents to say, hey, there's other ways to do it. We tried to laterally think when we heard these different stories, you have to take pieces and steal pieces and go back to networks and say, can I ask some more questions? Those are the ways you're going to come up with solutions. And so by the virtue of the fact, some of the questions you're asking, I've heard the course of today, I'm very buoyant that I'm going to bring my family here and we're going to come to Sudbury and, enjoy not just, of course, the IMAX theater, which I was impressed to see, but some of these new ventures, and I hope it's within partnership with some of the Aboriginal people, because, my family wants to see that, of course, too. And to that, I say thank you. The invitation was very kind. I did have a wonderful time this past day. You kept me busy. And probably a little bit less busy than I would have been if I stayed home. So, thank you.